Hello, welcome back, everybody, to the Helen Plays podcast. I'm your host, Jessika Morgan, and I'm a national victims' rights advocate. And today we'll be pulling back to the curtain on system that has mastered the art of pretending to protect victims of domestic violence. We're talking about domestic violence industry and the court system, and why so many survivors are still failing through the cracks of institutions built on billion-dollar budgets, glowing mission statements, and empty promises that they give to victims and their children. This is not a feel-good conversation. This is a truth-telling operation. And as you guys know, I am going to tell the truth. Okay. So the system that pretends to protect. Victims walk into these systems expecting safety. They expect compassion. And most of all, they expect justice. What they get instead is a maze of politics, paperwork, and performative advocacy by actors in the court system, so-called domestic violence victims, advocates. So while the public hears words like empowerment, trauma-informed, and survivor-centered, many victims experience the total opposite, okay? They have decisions that are made without them. Advocates who won't advocate, who are actually just following their organization's policy and procedures. I've actually sat in trainings in different states that they give to, because we are required to go to the trainings and we have to get our certifications, we have to have retrainings and so forth. And the way that they approach in helping victims of domestic violence and their children in these trainings is absolutely absurd, okay? This is not what really happens when you are in the field working with victims of domestic violence. And also, too, here's the truth, is that many of these organizations and that employ other domestic violence shelters, the court system, and so forth, that employ advocates. These advocates are fresh. A lot of them are interns. They're fresh out of college with no work experience, no experience in the field. And the other ones that's been there for a while, they have been conditioned to the culture of those organizations to go along to get along, so these organizations can continue to receive government grant money and funding. Okay. Many people have asked me over the years, why don't you open up a domestic violence shelter? And me and my partner, we had talked about that for many years and discussed it. But here's the thing. When you start receiving grant money and funding from local, state, and federal places, they're going to tell you how you can help, what you can do, and who you can help. There is many domestic violence organizations so when you call the shelter to try to get into the shelter, right, they're going to ask you a series of questions. Then you're going to be either approved or not approved based upon what answers you give. Okay. Now, sometimes you may not be able to get into the shelters because they are at capacity, they have no beds available, and so forth. But these organizations, because of the state and federal funding that they receive to operate, they will only take you in if you meet certain criteria. Not to mention, once you get into the shelter, right, you are only afforded to stay there possibly maybe 60 to 90 days tops. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was going through my domestic violence situation, I don't know how you expect me to heal and get my life together in 90 days after I have been receiving verbal, mental, emotional, and physical abuse from an individual, right? So victims, when they go to the court system, when they go to these organizations, and when they're trying to get someone to help them, they often experience decisions that are made without them. And like I said before, advocates who won't advocate, or a lot of times don't know what the hell they're doing, judges who minimize abuse, and agencies more worried about liability than lives. So the system sells protection, but rarely delivers it, period. Okay. So let's talk about the business of saving victims, right? Let's call this out exactly what it is. Corporate precision. Domestic violence is now an industry, not a movement. Unlike it was many years ago, the mission for helping survivors of domestic violence has now turned into ways to profit off of these innocent victims and their children's pain, okay? And also the breakdown of the family unit. Billions of dollars flow into DV programs every year, yet survivors are turned away for not 15 criteria. Some shelters impose rules that re-traumatize. Organizations chase grant money instead of outcomes. And also more money goes into operating these organizations than actually helping a victim to get housing, to get back on their feet. Now, there is some very good organizations out here. Personally, I found that the smaller an organization is, the better service that they give to victims and their children. When it comes to large organizations, that's where I see a lot of the issue and the customer service part of it, I guess you could say, that goes into helping the victims. So many large nonprofits have evolved into grant-dependent bureaucracies, politically attached machines, and PR-driven brands. And it's really sad because what we're seeing is that too many leaders, too many of these organizations that call themselves supposedly helping victims, the court system, they have forgotten the mission, which is saving lives, not saving their budgets, okay? And when survivors question the process, they're labeled as difficult, non-compliant, or uncooperative. I hear this a lot, especially when it involves the court system, the court's attorneys. And then if DSS, I think in certain areas it's called Child Protective Services, and other areas called DCFS, they label victims who start to question the process, ask questions, trying to protect themselves, protect their children. They're labeled as difficult, non-compliant, uncooperative, or mentally unstable, which is like there's so much more focus on the victim and their children and how they're behaving than the behaviors of the abuser, right? So in a nutshell, when victims start to question these processes and are labeled like that, well, the real translation is that you're hurting our metrics. You're making us look bad, right? Now, don't even let me get started on the courts. We need an entire overhaul in the family court system. Some areas, especially like where I moved from, Charlotte, North Carolina, they have the worst, most corrupt family court system that there is in the Southeast, okay? But not to say that, in a nutshell, we need a total reform across the family court system and how it is structured in the nation, period, okay? Because domestic violence doesn't end when a survivor asks for help. It often gets worse, especially when they leave. And then once they've left, when children are involved, many survivors experience what we call post-separation abuse. If you don't know what post-separation abuse is, I highly suggest that you look it up and familiarize yourself with what it means. It is a new term. We really worked hard to get that out there and to educate the courts, to educate the community, not just on what the power and control will was, but also in what the power post-separation abuse is. So there's two different wills. You have the power and control will that happens when you are still in the domestic violence relationship. The post-separation abuse will looks at what survivors and their children experience when children are involved and they leave their abuser and now they're involved in family court system, okay? The family courts and criminal courts are riddled with judicial bias, negligence, outdated training. I mean, it's straight up BS. Systemic apathy, inconsistent rulings, unchecked evaluator misconduct, and a lot of times total disregard for evidence that has been presented to them. I got a call. So as you guys know, we transitioned we gave the announcement that we were transitioning from working with individual clients starting in November, right? This month. and to focus more on legislative reform, policy reform, and so forth. So we are so we were supposed to stop taking clients in November. However, depending upon the situation, I do not mind helping on certain cases and consulting on certain cases. So someone reached out to our organization about their cases currently in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, because we do advocacy for both the state of Florida as well as North Carolina. We are a 501c3 organization, and we're housed in both of those. And since North Carolina is our home state, so we registered here as a foreign entity in the state of Florida. This woman, when I looked at it, I was like, I don't even want to deal with Mecklenburg County. I do not. Charlotte, North Carolina, and Mecklenburg County court system. That entire court system, whether you're on the civil side, the criminal side, is jacked up from the floor up. So in this case, there was a mother and she sent in the letter from a previous therapist and drawings that the children had made in allegations of sexual abuse. There is a letter from a clinician in regards to sexual abuse allegations and what the children disclosed to this previous therapist. She wrote letters to DSS, wrote letters to whoever, and also law enforcement. Now, fast forward, what she put in her affidavit to the court and her testimony to the court is totally contradictory to what the current therapist has said, what DSS is saying. Now they are trying to make it as if the mother is lying and got mental health issues because she has harming the children through and projecting false allegations onto the kids and so forth. I'm just looking at this like, what in the hell is going on? And so that's what I sit here and say is that the family court, a lot of times they have judicial bias, total negligence from the court system and the so-called actors, the forensic evaluators, the psychologists, even DSS social workers. And in this specific case, the information that I'm looking at, court hearings and stuff, it clearly on my end, the way that, because I've been doing this for over 10 years, I think at this point that the system is just trying to cover their ass in this situation and gaslight the mother. And this is not the first time that I've seen that, especially in that area. So victims walk in seeking justice and walk out traumatized, bankrupted, or punished for speaking the truth. And this is exactly what is happening in this case that I just talked about, as well as other cases that I have seen in not just Charlotte, North Carolina, but in other states, family courts across the country. Okay. I myself am a survivor, not only of domestic violence, but I'm also a survivor of post-separation abuse. And I will tell you personally that the trauma that what I received from the family court system was way worse, and how I was treated and how my family was treated and how I was treated by the system was way worse than what I experienced actually from my abuser, which you would think sounds crazy, but it was way worse and very traumatizing. Yes, this is why I care so much and so passionate about this issue, is because not only did how do I work in the field now professionally, I also experienced this injustice myself and my family personally. And I walked out was traumatized, bankrupted, and punished for speaking the truth. And so I try my best that even though I know that I probably did not receive the justice that I wish that I would have got, it is my mission to ensure that the people who contact me for advocacy and for support, that I help get justice for them. That to me is my justice today, is helping other people get justice for what they've been through. And so they don't have to go through near as bad as what I went through dealing with the family courts when I was leaving. So the court system has become a place where abusers gain power, victims lose credibility, and children become collateral damage. So let's just be real. If the courts were a private sector company, they'd have been shut down for malpractice years ago. And that's the cold-hearted truth, right? So this ties into now what I'm going to talk about, which is performative advocacy and political gatekeeping. So this is the part that a lot of organizations, other advocates, so-called advocate organizations, domestic violence organizations, as well as the family court system and other actors that are usually involved when it comes to domestic violence, they do not want to admit this. But many large DV organizations have become politically aligned, ideologically controlled, dependent on talking points, and terrified of losing funding streams. Okay, I'm going to say that's probably the biggest one for a lot of them, is terrified of upsetting someone and losing their funding streams, right? So instead of pushing truth, they push trends. Instead of reform, they push public relations. And instead of listening to survivors, they listen to their donors. I have been very blessed over the years to where we have private donors who donate, as well as we do fundraising, and we have put our own money into supporting and advocating for the people, for the clients and stuff like that we have served. But I'm very grateful to our private donors and others in the faith-based community as well that has supported our advocacy efforts and working with survivors of domestic violence as well that are experiencing post-separation abuse. So a lot of times grassroots advocates, especially those of us who are faith-based, survivor-led movements, are treated like outliers, right? So we are ignored, discredited, silent, and they don't want to fund us. Frankly, I really don't give a damn, personally, whether you fund or not, because if I would receive funding, me and my partner, we discussed that if receiving funding is going to stop us or limit us from being able to support and help individuals, the ones that we support and the ones that we help, and that we're going to be limited based upon what they want us to do and threaten to stop funding to do this, that, and the other, then we'd just rather not have it. And, God has blessed us once again, he's blessed us very, very well over the last few years to where we have people that donate. We do fundraising, and also blessed us to where we can put money back into the organizations and stuff like that ourselves to help survivors and their children. So I want to say that, because, and that's the thing too, we refuse to play the political game and get involved in nonprofit wars, right? So I'm going to sit here and say that exposing hypocrisy isn't about tearing down the movement. It's about saving it from within. This isn't an attack. This is an audit. A demand for accountability, a demand for transparency, a demand for outcomes, because survivors and their children deserve real protection, real resources, real justice, real leadership, not optics, not buzzwords, not gatekeeping. And so it is time for a full-scale reform, from nonprofit boardrooms to courthouse hallways. And this is something that is really big on my heart to do, is for us, like I said, to have a total reform in how domestic violence is addressed at the crisis level, but mainly how it is addressed in family court across this country and across this nation. Because I'm done whispering. I'm done with the pretending. I am done accepting the systems that profit off the same pain that they fail to prevent. And I'm tired of seeing how these systems are continuously hurting victims and their children. And the court system, from the judges to the attorneys, profit off of the breakdown of these of the family. And we need to focus more on the abuser than spotlighting the victim. There is very little consequences when it comes to the abuser. From, like I've pushed before, they're the ones that need to be told to leave the home, not the victims and their children. There needs to be changes to where if you're married and both of you are on the deed, whoever the abuser is, there needs to be where you can file, once you have your injunction in place, you can file to have the abuser removed from the deed without having to buy them out and pay fees and other fines to the court. So reform is not optional in this situation. It's very much overdue. And the industry must shift from performative to impactful, political to principled, and self-protected to survivor-centered instead of self-centered and self-protective, the way that organizations are operating. So today's episode shook you up a little bit. Then I'm very honest, I'm very blunt, and I know that I get a lot of clapback, even from other advocates and organizations in the domestic violence field. And frankly, I don't give a damn, because this is the truth. And you are profiting and receiving billions of dollars. This has become an industry for profit on the blood, sweat, and tears of victims and their children. And it's absolutely sick at this point. So I just want everybody to share this video, talk about it, hold your leaders and agencies accountable, follow Survivors Outreach Ministries for more truth, more advocacy, and more disruption. This is Jessika Morgan. I am a national victims' rights advocate. So stay loud, stay vigilant, and stay unshakable, committed to spreading the truth.